The Bible is filled with some truly amazing stories. Think about it. Moses parting the sea. Jesus healing the blind. Jesus raising people from the dead. Jesus himself being raised from the dead. These miracles are really beyond belief. But if we're not careful, all of these great miracle stories can give us this false impression that in biblical times, miracles were common. But that's not true. In fact, that's the myth that we're going to tackle today. This idea that miracles were common in biblical times. So, as we think about this idea, I want us to think really deeply about some of those miracle stories and look at what the Bible really says. So, think about the Exodus story. Think about Moses going before Pharaoh toe to toe. And what is the way that he is supposed to show Pharaoh that he is actually a representative of God? The way that he's actually supposed to show that is miracles, right? And Moses will use one miracle, and then the magicians in Pharaoh's court, it was common for pharaohs to have magicians or sorcerers, but be like our present day magicians doing these tricks, these illusions. And what did they do? Moses does a miracle, they try to match him. Moses does a miracle, they try to match him. And they're trying to prove that what Moses was doing was not that extraordinary. And then Moses starts to do the plagues. Well, God starts to do the plagues. And then what happens? One plague comes, the magicians try to copy it. Another one, they try to copy. Another one, they try to copy. And then eventually, they can't copy it anymore. They can no longer prove that these miracles are just commonplace. And they have to admit something different is happening. Something amazing is happening. God has broken into time, has broken into history, and he's done something different. And it's the same thing with Moses parting the Red Sea. That is not something that's light. That's not something that's easy. Instead, it's something that is truly amazing. The people are terrified. Here they are, standing in front of this sea, and they've got an army behind them. It never crossed their mind that God was going to separate the sea. Because that kind of thing doesn't happen. It is a miracle. And that's the point, right? The whole point of a miracle is that it's not something that typically happens. It can't be commonplace or it's no longer a miracle. But what about Jesus, right? So I talked about Moses, talked about the Old Testament. Don't run away yet. I know you're starting to click away. But wait, ask yourself, what about Jesus? Jesus, the central figure in all of the Bible, what about him? What about his miracles? We have this idea that Jesus is walking around healing people and doing all of these different things, raising the dead, and everybody's like, oh, well, Jesus, Jesus, that's the kind of things that he does. But that's not what the Bible says, right? I think one great example of this is when Jesus heals the paralytic. This paralytic's friends come and they drop him down through the ceiling. By the way, great set of friends there. But they drop him down through the ceiling, and then what happens? Jesus heals the man, and I want to get the wording just right. Because this is what Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 8, this is how it describes the crowd's response. They respond by saying, but when the crowds saw this, they were awestruck, and they glorified God, who had given men such authority. Think about that. The response of the crowd was not, Jesus. No, the response of the crowd was, how? This kind of thing does not happen. How? And it's not just this passage. I encourage you, read Matthew, and you're going to see that over and over. And not just Matthew, you'll see it in the other Gospels as well. But you'll see this over and over again. You'll see, and then they were amazed, and then they were amazed. And then you'll even see his closest associates. He calms the storm. He walks on water. And what do they say? Oh, who is this that even the wind and the waves obey? How is this possible? You see, we, both as Christians and then people who are not Christians, can fall into this trap. And we fall into this idea that that the Bible describes these kinds of miracles as just common. It's not a big deal. But that's not what the Bible actually says. The Bible says these are huge deals. Miracles were not common. And that's why these are miracles. Because God intervened in a way that was truly amazing. So in your life, think about this. If you're that skeptic and you're like, oh, well, the Bible's just filled with all these stories and they would believe anything back then. But that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says people tried not to believe. And it was only when they saw so many different things that they had to admit that there was something special. Or maybe you're a Christian, but you're in this situation where you think, oh, well, miracles happened all the time back then, but not now. They didn't happen all the time back then. That's not true. They were truly spectacular because they're miracles, and that's the point. The same God that worked then can work now. The same God that worked in their lives can work in your life. So don't live this life thinking that, hey, they were special back then, but not me. So I hope that this changes the way you look at this subject and think about this subject and think about miracles in the Bible.